Welcome everybody to our last show of 2020. I'm really excited about this one. My friend Emily Brewster is here from Merriam-Webster. Hello, Emily.
Hello, Mark. No,
Hi.
that music is so great. It was worth waiting for.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you heard the music. Did you see the credits? Did you see your
No.
name there? No.
Well, I
No,
did
it
it
was on
first,
the
just once,
left.
just a flash, and then the
Yeah,
music.
yeah,
But
yeah.
the black
Okay.
screen meant I could focus on the music, which really is great.
Yeah, good. The thing is, we're going to put this on YouTube, and it will seem like none of this happened. It'll just be seamless. It'll be beautiful. So you can go back and watch that in about 3 months. We're getting the YouTube videos up. Emily you probably know she's getting more of a public view, and I think that's something interesting that we're finding from lexicographers everywhere. There are no longer people sitting in a cubicle or a small at a small desk spending their entire day defining. I'm sure you'd spend some days like that, but Emily does is the co-host of the new Word Matters podcast with Merriam-Webster, which I've been enjoying immensely. And you write for the website. Let's start with that. Let's start with the podcast. It seems a natural to me. It's a something you probably should have done years ago. How did it come about? What was the process there?
Well, yeah, now that we are doing it, does feel like maybe we should have been doing this a long time. But it came out of really two different things. One is that we have these. I'm one of a member of a team of writers, as are all the other podcast co-hosts, in addition to another editor, Ben Korzek. And we have every 2 weeks we have meetings where we discuss what we call, our content pitch meeting. So what we're kind of suggesting as articles to write. And these meetings are really not at all in the traditional vein of what lexicographers do with one another, which is never speak to each other, really. It's very,
Right.
very solitary work. And so, if you want to communicate with another lexicographer traditionally, at Merriam-Webster, you would do it on a little slip of paper, as I'm sure my colleagues have mentioned.
Yeah.
It's a really striking thing about the way that things used to be. But we have these content pitch meetings every 2 weeks, and we discuss things. And person will raise an idea, and another person will make a suggestion about it or introduce some other aspect. And so I realized these are fun conversations we're having, and then that was combined with the fact that I've been a regular guest on a local to Western Massachusetts radio station for a number of years now. And during that time, I became more comfortable speaking aloud to people who are right about lexicography and people now knowing lexicographers. The lexicography no longer is the promise of anonymity that it used to be, which takes some adjusting. Oh, have
Right.
I lost you?
Yeah, no, sorry. I was playing with the sound. I get a little bit of sometimes we get the internet doesn't quite cooperate, and so the sound is in and out. You're clear. You're fine. I was just sort of playing with a button up here to see if I could get something to sound a little bit better. When you how did let's take us back. How did you start in lexicography? How did you start at Merriam-Webster? And was this what you kind of had in mind back then, or is the job changed incredibly?
Oh, well, it's changed a lot, and
Uh,
yeah, it certainly has changed a lot. But I was studying linguistics and philosophy at UMass Amherst, which is just up the road. It's about 20 miles from Springfield, from where
mm,
Merriam-Webster's offices are. And I was
mhm.
finishing up my bachelor's degree, and I was recently married, and my husband was just starting graduate school at UMass Amherst. And so I was thinking about going to grad school, really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And a professor mentioned to me that Merriam-Webster was just down the road in Springfield. And the proverbial light bulb went off in my head. I had never considered lexicography. I just didn't give a thought to the fact that dictionaries are written at that point. And certainly nothing in my linguistics education addressed dictionaries. Really, I think of lexicography as kind of in my experience, I think of it kind of it as it is linguistics based, but it is, as far as the practical training of linguistics, it's really kind of linguistics adjacent. But when this professor mentioned to me that Merriam-Webster was just down the road, it suddenly struck me, just, oh, maybe this is exactly what I want to do. So at the advice of a friend, I reached out to the director of defining, and
It's a great title, Director of Defining.
it is. It's right up there with some of the best job titles, I think. I asked him if he would grant me an informational interview, if I could come in and meet with him, and he said no, but that he would talk to me for 20 minutes or something. So we made a phone appointment, and at the end of that appointment, we had this conversation that really just confirmed that yes, this is a very interesting field that I think I would really like. He said the company was not hiring, but that I could, I was welcome to send in my resume and they would keep it on file. So I sent in my resume, and then I called him every 3 months for a year.
Good.
And just kind of on the date, I had an alarm in my, I don't even think it was a Palm Pilot at the time. And so I would just call him every 3 months and let him know that I was still interested. And then finally, after a year of that, he called me one day and I went in for an interview and I got the job. So the key thing to me about that story is that every other person at Merriam-Webster, as far as I know, has answered an ad in the paper or, online now. I don't know of anyone else who hounded the director of defining for a year before getting an interview. But
well, it does seem like that it's a common thing, though, that there is no, people wonder, how do you get it? That people love the idea of working at Merriam-Webster, and people, I'm sure, ask you all the time, how do I get in there? But there is no clear path where somebody is in college. I mean, most people I've spoken with have your experience that they're in college, they don't think about it as, I'm going to go to college so I can work at Merriam-Webster. That's not a path, and yet it is a path for a lot of people. We have a couple of questions already, and please ask questions in the group chat, whatever you want to ask. Heather's are going to be kind of keeping an eye on those, and we'll ask you to unmute and ask in the room. But I think we already have a couple of questions lined up. Heather, what do we have out there?
Yes, we have a question from Susan. Susan, do you want to unmute and ask? There you are.
Here I am. Hi. Hi, Emily. Nice to meet you. I'm a big fan of the Word Matters podcast. I've been listening.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
thank
it's
you.
really great. You guys have such a nice chemistry, and I always learn something. So my question was, as far as the dictionary, what are the criteria for updating entries? And, how do you start? Like if you are going to start updating a definition, what's the first thing you do? And then if you could just take us a little bit through your process of updating one of those. How does that work?
Yeah, interesting.
Sure. There are multiple ways that happens. So sometimes an editor will be assigned a group defining project. So for example, we'll be examining, all the entries for constellations, that would be for a science definer. I have spent time doing defining projects where I'm looking at all of our gender and sexuality vocabulary. And so you want to kind of bring it all to a modern standard. You want to make sure that the language and the definitions is parallel where it needs to be. So things can happen in that way, where it's a group defining project that has to do with the semantic relationship between the words. But definitions are also just targeted because they are among the most common words. So common words looked up at Merriam-Webster.com. So there was another time when I spent, a full, I think it was an entire year working on doing full revisions for the unabridged dictionary of the 12 most commonly looked up words. And that was based on, these are words that we know get the entries for these words get examined, and we want to make these entries as good as we can possibly make them. As far as the actual process, the first thing to do is to make sure that everything that is in the existing entry is accurate and is clearly written. And so there's tinkering there because defining styles change. Also, the dictionary in the past 30 years has changed so remarkably. And really, it's in truth, our process has responded more recently than that, in that we are no longer, and I would say really it's more like 10 years, that we are no longer considering the Merriam-Webster.com dictionary to be matched to a print publication. We do still print the collegiate dictionary, but the two books have diverged so that the Merriam-Webster.com dictionary does no longer have to be this super concise collection of definitions. So we can make our definitions as long as it is useful for them to be. We can add as many examples as we want to. So there is, as with the writing of the definitions, as with the defining of new words, it's all the revisions have to be based on evidence. So we're examining our own citation database, and then we use various corpora that we have access to. And it's all just, making sure that what the various senses in an entry are complete and accurate, and that they reflect the evidence. We also no longer order strictly by historical order. So because the dictionary is a gigantic, slow-moving ship, there are some entries that are still have their definitions in historical order, and then there are others that have definitions in whatever order is considered to be most useful. And our instructions are really that vague. So there is discussion about, as a definer, I will write down, I've reordered this entry, and here's my rationale for putting this sense first, and here is why I moved this sense to this position. A lot of times it ends up that an entry will have the most common definitions first, and then the kind of less common ones at the near bottom. But sometimes there's semantic relationships that it makes sense to group together in a way that defies what is most common.
Right. Yeah, and that was one of the topics of one of the podcasts recently. Well, I not recently because I listened to them in mixed up order, but about how there are advantages and disadvantages to having the most recent sense or the oldest sense first. You can see the progression, but then sometimes it just doesn't make sense when somebody's looking for a particular word. They want the meaning, not the history of it.
Right.
Yeah. So you mentioned the corpora you use, or I would say corpuses, but that's a semantic difference we can a word difference we can debate. I like to Americanize or anglicize words from foreign countries, which is also a topic that you talked about on the podcast. So I would say corpuses, and a lot of people would say corpora. I'm sure in the business you say corpora. But my question is, what it used to be, well, and maybe it still is, but you look at edited text. That's sort of the standard. But now there's the ability to not just look at edited text, because there's so much text available, and there's so many corpuses out there that are sort of common speech and natural speech and internet. So how do you balance that? Is Merriam-Webster getting away from that, where you're looking at word usage beyond what's actually printed in publications?
Yes, and I just want to back for a minute and say that when I started working at Merriam-Webster, we at that time we were working on a new addenda to the unabridged dictionary. No, a new addendum to the unabridged dictionary. And I was talking to my new boss, who I had been calling every 3 months for a year, and I was trying to keep them straight. And he just looked at me and says, "No, we just do addenda. It's one addenda, 2 addendas, 3 addendas." And so I was very relieved to not have to worry about addendas. I still do corpora, maybe because of the linguistics background. That was where I first learned the word, was in this more technical application. But I think it's just so fascinating how it used to be that the only evidence a lexicographer had to examine or that the great overwhelming preponderance of evidence that a lexicographer had to examine of words in use was words that had been sanctioned by some kind of platform. You either had a pulpit
Right.
and somebody was recording it, or you had a stage and somebody was writing down what you said, or you know, we would have access to, you know, the Supreme Court decisions, and we had newspapers and magazines and books, and that was what we had. You had to have a publisher for your ideas in print to be visible to a lexicographer. We all have always paid attention to letters and to, you know, our citation files also have snippets from excuse me, from, you know, restaurant menus. And so we've always paid attention to those things, but now there's just so much available evidence of informal speech and well, not informal writing and informal speech, because we have so many, you know, access to so many transcripts that we did not used to have.
Right.
So we do not only consider published edited text by any stretch of the imagination, but what the source of a use is still is weighed in our minds. And so I think we're better at covering informal language than we used to be. But if it's only appearing on Twitter, and if it's only appearing in you know, television transcripts and that kind of thing, then you know, that is evidence for giving a label like informal at an entry. But you know, there's the amount of evidence that there is to consider in defining a word or revising an entry is just overwhelming, truly overwhelming.
Yeah, right, sure. So let's say you're doing a particular word. What's the most recent word you've been working on? Can you?
Oh. Let me think. I've got to think back beyond the haze of the word of the year, which ate up, I feel like it ate up like a month of my life. That isn't true. Because I've been working on some really interesting terms.
You can make something up if you can't remember the exact one.
Okay, well, one that comes to mind that I just like to think about is the word meta.
Meta, oh, okay.
That's so meta. Because that was an interesting word that I worked on for a long time. So, and it has some informal, you know, very informal use, but it also has this heritage that is in academia. So that was an interesting one, and it also was a challenging one to define, because it's this kind of, I don't know. So I think it's a very interesting word.
So is it a prefix as well as a standalone word?
Yes, the standalone word is the new entry. Yes, we had defined it as a prefix for I don't know, a long time. I assume it's been in there for almost, you know, forever.
So you come out and you said, okay, today is the meta day. I'm going to start working on meta. You're up to the M's. Where do you start with something like that?
When I'm defining a word like meta, I start by looking through our own citation files to see what editors over the years have collected on this. So the citation files that we have at Merriam-Webster date back to the late 19th century, and they are snippets of context that have been identified by Merriam-Webster editors as being, you know, an interesting word use for one reason or another. It could be that the example in this snippet is so perfect it would be great to be featured in a definition. It could be that this is a new or emerging use, or just a really bizarre use. Like, you know, is this going to catch on? Maybe not. But my first step is always to go there, because what I know is that in our citation files there are, it's kind of like a very, very closely curated collection. It's, you know, it's not a proper corpus at all. But so I go there and I look at what we have, and I kind of collect it all and look at it all and start sorting things. And then I look more broadly and start trying to look for typical collocations of the word. You know, what are the typical phrases that this word appears in? What verbs is it used with? And then I collect evidence like that, and I look at different, you know, I try to find use in various kinds of sources. And then comes the process of sorting it all into the different senses. And I know when I was working on meta, at one point I had five different senses that I thought were all unique, and then I ended up with just two.
Oh, really? So what happened to the other three? You obviously you combined them into.
Yes.
You decided.
Yep.
Was it So how does that work? I mean, are there some, is that a debate you have with yourself and with others, and you say, no, we really need that third sense because it's unique.
In this case, it was all just the debate with me.
Yeah.
So, and I should say this word, it wasn't like I said, I think I was paying attention to this development of meta for a really long time, and I was just had notes on it of my own. And then I think I probably worked on it for 9 months in all, because I would just leave it and then come back to it. Because other projects and also I was kind of waiting for the word's meanings to settle out. A word like meta is used, so it started out in academia, and then it was being applied in really playful and informal ways. And then, when the kids start using it, and it's like, it enters the world of like playful banter and slang, then it can kind of take on these other aspects. And sometimes as a lexicographer, as a definer, I'm really waiting for a word to settle out and to just kind of like, it's not really ready. It's not really reasonable to define a word until it's really found its footing and it's kind of stopped moving around so much and stopped shape shifting.
Right.
I think with meta, I don't think I threw any of them out. Sometimes you'll realize that, this sense is so obscure. We have these examples of it, but nobody really uses this word this way. This is like a semantic thread that got started and then kind of abandoned, and these other meanings have really taken over, and they are the only truly established meanings. But I think with meta, I really just distilled those 5 into 2 by grouping them together, by just writing a broader definition.
And where would we find this definition of meta? Is it on the free site yet, or?
Yes, yeah.
Yet to be. And then the process there. So it's on the free site. Is it then immediately moved over to because I have I have the subscription and I use the unabridged and the collegiate. Would I find it there also?
I hope so, and I'm not positive. My job does not actually involve that.
Right.
But I know that we have for a time. This is a few years ago now. We really had the Merriam-Webster.com site was on one kind of platform, and the unabridged site was on a different kind of platform. And I think now our practice is really to update the unabridged dictionary within a few days of the update to the free site.
Right.
But there used to be quite a lag because the platforms were so different, and it was such an onerous task.
So are we done? Will there be a 4th unabridged print version ever, or is that simply not likely to happen?
Nobody will say no. And I love the idea of there someday being a new printing of the unabridged dictionary that is able to be multi-volume, right? Like the unabridged dictionary has for so many years was really restrained by those twin constraints of affordability and portability. And we had the second unabridged Webster's second that came out in 1934, and it was 17 pounds. Yes, there it is.
I love to pull books off my bookshelf. I don't have a third, but I've got the second. Beautiful.
It's a great book, but that I believe that is the largest book that was ever mass produced.
Right.
Because it is physically as large as you could practically make a book.
Right. And
so
the third was smaller,
I love the idea of there being an unabridged dictionary that is 3 volumes. And why not? Because a print unabridged dictionary has a different function in the 21st century than an unabridged dictionary did in the late 20th century. It just does. When it's for like settling in with and really digging into and spending some time with, and we use the internet when we want a quick answer to something. That's just what we do. Right, and I did see a question pop up about the collegiate dictionary, and yes, that is definitely not. There's no question that there will be a 12th collegiate, and the decision as to when that will happen is above my pay grade.
And this is an interesting point, and we have questions, so I don't want to take up all the time, but this is an interesting point that my collegiate dictionary, no, that's not it, sorry, that's the competitors. They look alike, of course, both called Websters, both with red. So this is the 11th edition, and I'm not sure what the date is. This is my pride and joy. This is my collegiate with all the editors. I don't know if you can see that with the light, but this is the signed edition, all the editors who worked on it. So I remember I had a hard time finding your name on here. I think that's it right down here, isn't it? I don't know if you probably can't see that.
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Anyway, yeah. I can see the
I
Emily,
remember
but then
signing
it
it,
gets
so I know it's
confusing.
there somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, the years change so much, and there are so many updates that go on with different printings over the years, and this 11th and another 11th, the one that we would get today and the original, there are some huge differences, aren't there? Yeah. And so at what point is at what point do you say, well, okay, we've done enough, let's make it a 12th?
Yeah, again, I really don't know. That decision is not, as a definer, I am happy that I don't have to actually think about that. I can tell you that when we do a new edition of a dictionary, it is a process that takes 3 years, and that involves examining every single entry in the dictionary. So when we make a new edition, every entry will be examined in that process.
Right.
So that has not yet happened for a 12th. There has to be a real commitment for the it takes up most of the editor's time for 3 years.
Sure. Right. Okay. Well, let's get to. I think we have some more questions from our wonderful audience.
Yes, we do. We have one from Chris. Chris, if you want to unmute and ask.
Sure. My question was really about how much of the process of defining a word is, a sole definer's responsibility, and how much of it is collaborative, and is there any sort of approval process or review process?
It is not collaborative unless an editor wants to consult with another editor, or I sometimes will query somebody who I know has a background in something related to a term I'm working on. But there are stages of defining. So there's a primary definer will propose a definition, and they will summarize what their backing is for the definition. I found evidence of this word dating back to 1982 and in these kinds of sources, and here's a definition. And then a copy editor, in our lingo, it's a copy editor who comes through next and reviews it and makes any revisions that they see fit. Also in that, somewhere in there, you have a pronunciation editor and an etymologist and a dating editor. Science editors review it if there's any kind of science element to it. And then there is a final reader who does a final review, and that's usually the director of defining who does that. So multiple people look at it and can make edits to it, and then the final reader is the one who has the final say on what the definition will look like.
So, and you mentioned the word of the year, how you've been busy with that, and what is Merriam-Webster's word of the year? You can.
Yeah, it's so not surprising. Pandemic.
And interestingly, so pandemic is also dictionary.com's word of the year.
Yeah.
And I have seen some other dictionaries from other countries and other languages, and it's certainly a theme. But I find this so we're going to talk about this. Let's do a teaser. Like we're not going to have a show in 2 weeks. We're going to take a week off, and then January 5th we're going to return for a word of the year episode. So the American Dialect Society is choosing their list of words of the year on Thursday, doing an online Zoom thing this year, and we'll have somebody from American Dialect Society, somebody, I think Peter from Merriam-Webster is going to be on the show. We'll have somebody from dictionary.com, which also chose pandemic, and we'll have somebody from Oxford dictionaries talking, and they sort of didn't. They didn't choose a word of the year this year. They just made a list of words and say, here, there's so many.
Yeah,
So
it's 2020. You do what you got to do. You just do.
yeah, well, and it's interesting because I imagine that the American Dialect Society is not going to choose pandemic because pandemic is a word that's been in usage for a long time, and the criteria is a little bit different, right? They will choose a word that has sudden. It doesn't necessarily have to be new, but it has to be suddenly, something. So what have you given that any thought in all your work on Merriam-Webster's Word of the Year? Do you have any predictions for the American Dialect Society Word of the Year?
Oh, well, I assume that COVID-19 as a term will come up.
Mhm. Mhm.
That is a word that did not qualify for our word of the year consideration, only because it didn't exist in 2019. This is a word that was coined and
Right.
took 34 days to get into our dictionary. It broke all the records.
Yes, it's amazing. Yeah.
But our word of the year is always based on a comparison of lookups from previous years. So COVID-19, pandemic was looked up very, 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 very frequently at Merriam-Webster.com throughout the year, with a number of different occasions when it was looked up, especially great numbers. And then it also, people were looking up the word far more frequently than they did in 2019. So that was how it became our word of the year. That's what we are looking for. We're looking for a word that was very prominent, that was clearly in people's minds throughout the year, and also a word that was uniquely in people's minds in a year, because it as is evidenced by how it compares to the previous years. Otherwise the word of the year would always be affect and effect, because everybody's always looking.
Really? Wait, that's the number one lookup?
Well, it's always in the top 10 for sure,
Yeah.
right?
Oh.
On any given day. And who can blame anybody for that? That is just a travesty. That pair is just,
Sure.
the biggest headache of the English language, I think.
Lay and lie.
Oh, lay and lie are also very, very difficult, but yeah. Anyway, my vote is still with affect effect for sure.
Okay, all right. I'd say lay and lie, but that's okay. We have a question. We have a question right about that, I think.
We do, actually. Mary Jane wanted us to ask that if you could give us an idea of the top 10 most looked up words for 2020. This felt like the perfect time to ask.
Oh, well, top 10 looked up words for all of 2020. There is an answer to that question, and it would take research for me to determine what exactly the answer is. We do have a word of the year collection. We named pandemic as our word of the year, and then I think we have 10 additional words that we identified as also words of the year, either because they met those same criteria that the word of the year did, but some of them just had these, enormous spikes that were unique to the year. For example, Kraken. When the Seattle Hockey League chose that as their name, and people went and rushed to the dictionary, and Sidney Powell kind of helped it along. It was already in the list before that. Yeah, it's an interesting question. Love is a perennial top lookup, as are really common words that have complex application, words like disposition, words like pragmatic. Socialism and communism, fascism was big this year as far as what people are looking up. But the top lookups are typically, except for these unusual spikes that are driven by some kind of something that a word being used in the public sphere in a really unusual way, or a word that is prominent in a movie title, for example. Those can drive people to the dictionary to look up a word. But the kind of quotidian, day in, day out words that are looked up are the words that we're all familiar with, but that sometimes you might just want to understand it a bit better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and love is absolutely a fascinating phenomenon that I mean, most words, you maybe want the nuance of it, but love, to go to a dictionary to find out the definition of love.
Well, they're not right. That's and they're not looking for the meaning. love, right? They want more like the Foreigner song. I want to know what love is, you know, and they think that the dictionary cannot tell you that, right? That is
Right.
for musicians and poets and like philosophers. They will tell you what love is. We will only tell you what the word love is used to mean.
Yes.
So,
and
but yeah, I
spelling.
think sometimes people are just trying to, you know, a dictionary is often a starting place for exploring an idea. And so you can go and like, you want to ruminate on what love is. Well, how is the word used? And, you know, it's not that people don't know what the definition is. They are fluent in the use of this word. It doesn't trip them up in conversation or anything. They just want to understand it better. And they're looking for more, they're looking for, I don't know, just you know, a different take on it maybe.
Yeah, right. Okay, more questions from the audience. I think at least a couple more.
Yes, we have one from Karen. Our Karen Wise had a question.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Hi.
Hi, Emily. So this is something I once asked Peter about. So all the words get updated online, which is fabulous, but we don't know when that happens to what words. And like I remember about a year ago, I was telling someone something I've known for decades, that underway is one word as an adjective and two words as an adverb. And someone said, oh no, not anymore. I said, what? They changed it without telling me? So I was thinking that most of the editors I know would love some sort of a newsletter. It could be a subscription even. What got changed? What, you know, because I don't look up words that I know underway. Why would I look it up? So I don't know, that was an idea, something I think would be really useful.
We have actually talked about that in our content meetings, and I think that it really is a good idea that whenever we announce an update, we call them releases. When we announce an update to the Merriam-Webster.com dictionary, we usually highlight words that we think people are going to be especially interested in. But we really should do a highlighting of terms that are interesting or that are important to editors and to writers for style issues. And we have not done that traditionally, and I think we really should.
Good. Thanks.
And even with, I remember there were buttons for goodbye when you took the hyphen out of goodbye.
That's right.
But yeah, Karen's got one. She's going to show us. Oh, what is this? Yeah, you have to speak, Karen, so we can, so the camera goes to you if we're on speaker view. Oh, Karen's muted, so Karen, you're okay. If you go, Karen's showing us the goodbye. Was it goodbye to goodbye?
Hyphen.
Goodbye. And it's interesting because it was a it seemed to be archaic to use a hyphen in goodbye by the time Merriam-Webster got around to taking it out. And I suppose there are a lot of words that it's not that you really think that this should be this way. You probably don't necessarily use it in your own writing, but you just haven't gotten around to updating the dictionary.
It is a monumental task to keep up with all these kinds of shifts.
Yeah.
I do think that for hyphens, we would do well to monitor it more closely.
Well, and has it been, is it more reactive now than it was? I mean, I know that the typical way of doing it is you start with not even a category of words, but you'll start with like a letter, right? You start with C and you work your way to D and then E, then F. And then so by the time you get to J, it's been several years since anybody's looked at the J's. Is that still the case, or are you sort of more responding now to when you hear that something is maybe a little bit outdated?
Yeah, we are less alphabetically focused than we used to be, for sure. So there are some of these terms we really are monitoring very regularly. We've gotten a lot better at that in recent years, just keeping tabs on these terms and kind of watching their shifts more closely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are there more questions, or are we?
There
have we
are.
caught up? Oh, okay. Let's keep going.
We actually have a follow-up word of the year question from Chris. Chris, if you want to ask.
Sure. Well, actually, there's two parts of the question. Before the word of the year part, I'm just curious, because I really love these process issues. Do you ever consult other dictionaries as part of the research, in particular dictionaries that maybe have a little different approach than you? And I just remember a friend maybe 20 years ago sent me a Chambers as a gift. And I found that like I would just read it for the fun of it, because it just had such a different approach than sort of standard American dictionaries. And I'll just tell you, my thought about the word of the year is maybe it should be Zoom, or I wonder if Zoom will have an additional definition added as a result of the pandemic.
Zoom fatigue, I bet, is going to be on American Dialect Society's list. That's a good prediction. Yeah, yeah. Consulting other dictionaries is definitely tricky because you don't want to look at another dictionary's definition of something you're defining because it will pollute your mind. You can't look at it. But I definitely consult slang dictionaries. Like Green's Dictionary of Slang is just an outrageously amazing slang dictionary. It is incredibly useful. The OED is something that I consult, but again, if I'm defining something and I see that they have defined it, I can't look at it until late in my process because it's just too tricky as a definer. You can't, once those words are in there, you just can't get them out. But yes, there are all kinds of medical dictionaries can be very helpful. You know, law dictionaries for certain terms. Yeah, and I have my own various collection of the Dictionary of American Regional English is another gem. So yes, absolutely.
And controversially, what about the Urban Dictionary? Do you
oh yeah,
look into that? Mm-hmm.
Sure. I find the Urban Dictionary especially useful when I'm writing a words we're watching article. Which I'm usually typically not defining a word. I'm writing an article about a word that is a word that, you know, may eventually get entered, but there's going to be enough of a lag between the time when I'm researching to write this article and when I'm actually defining the word. That also the Urban Dictionary definitions tend not to even be for the right part of speech, so there isn't too much to worry about as far as like it, you know, messing with your defining your own defining language. But I love Urban Dictionary. It is not it's a great resource and a really interesting window onto the language.
Yeah. What's the dictionary over your right shoulder there? I assume that's a collegiate, but it's got the tabbed lettering, the one up top that's open.
Oh, that's the collegiate. It's just an old one, I think.
But that's an old one, right? I mean, you haven't done those wonderful little...
That's a really good point. I mean, it's the 11th, but I don't... It is. And I have one on my... That's my standing desk. And then I also have this sitting desk. And it's on... Yeah. I don't remember when those came out. I don't have to think about production as a definer, so I really try not to think about production.
Yeah. So do you... when you're looking up for, if you're if you're writing a letter to friends or something and you're an email and something escapes you a word, you're looking up, how do you look up what's your process for looking up a word? Do you go to the freemw.com, or do you do what I do and go to an Oxford product on my Macintosh operating system?
No, I am a loyal Merriam-Webster.com user, as you might expect. I also use our unabridged site. I really love the search features there. Mm-hmm. But yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so what dictionaries have did you work on the learners?
I did. I spent 5 years writing that dictionary. I did.
Yes. This is like I probably underutilized. I mean, I think I just love the definitions in here. This has always been one of my favorite dictionaries, the Learner's Dictionary, because of the way it's actually. Could you talk a little bit without getting too much in the weeds about the way you've defined words in here that's different from the collegiate and the unabridged?
Yeah, thank you for your praise of that dictionary. I think it's a really great dictionary, and I loved working on it. And it really informed our defining going forward after that book's publications. That the 11th Collegiate was published in 2003. The Learner's Dictionary was published in 2008. And it was the first dictionary that the company had written in a very long time that was really completely from scratch. So typically, you know, when we were writing one of the student dictionaries, for example, we would often start with the collegiate, or you would start, if you were writing the elementary school dictionary, you would start with you start with the intermediate school dictionary and kind of work from there and see what's appropriate and what's not, and then add things in. But the Learner's Dictionary was really written from scratch. We had kind of this alphabetical list of words, and of course we consulted our other dictionaries and were informed by that. But it was the first time that that concision, accuracy and simplicity were stressed more than concision, in a way that is now very much how we are operating when we update the Merriam-Webster.com dictionary. We also used to
you don't have the space considerations.
That's right. Well, and the Learner's Dictionary did. The Learner's Dictionary, because it was stripping out all of the technical vocabulary, it is quite a large book, but it doesn't include the technical, botanical words and all the kinds of medical terms and legal terms that are in the Collegiate Dictionary, because the dictionary is written for non-native English speakers who are proficient enough to use a monolingual dictionary. The defining vocabulary is very simple. For the most part, we used only about 3,000 words in the defining vocabulary. There are many, many exceptions beyond that, but many of the definitions really are written in this very simple defining vocabulary. And there are tons of example sentences. They're highlighted in blue. This dictionary is available for free at learnersdictionary.com. And also, some people may have noticed that the learner's definition is often on the Merriam-Webster.com entry page near the very bottom. There are, other definitions of words. There also is just so much, coming from a linguistics background, I really loved all the information that is included in a definition that I find just fascinating, and that native speakers don't have to think about, whether a noun is count or non-count. What kinds of collocations, of course we think about, dictionaries have traditionally, and we always note if a verb is transitive or intransitive. But in this dictionary, we talk about which senses of each word are transitive and which senses are intransitive. And, anyway, it's just got so much more grammatical information, really nuts and bolts. And it was an exciting dictionary to work on. It was also the dictionary that taught me about just how awful the letter D is.
Really?
Can I tell you the story?
I'm an L. I'm in
You're
love.
an L. Well, let me tell you, because this is something that you learn as a lexicographer. When we were writing the Learner's Dictionary, we never start at A. We always start at some other point in the alphabet, because A is, people open up a dictionary and they think they're going to read the whole thing through, and so A gets a lot of scrutiny. But we will start at, L and go through N and then go back to A. With this Learner's Dictionary, the project started in D, and by the time we got to the end of D, our director of defining, Steve Peralt, decided that really the project had changed so much that D had to be redone. The process, like the scope of the dictionary it had become clear that this was going to be a radically different dictionary from all of our other dictionaries. So I and another editor were assigned to redo all of D. And so it's very seldom that you're just one of two editors working on a letter like D. D is no slouch. There's a lot of vocabulary in D. And it turns out that a lot of it is just really dreadful and dire. And, there is death, and there is doom, and there is devastation, and there is destruction. And, there is like dumb and dunce and dunderhead. And it's just full of really, really, desperately depressing vocabulary. And I will never forget that about the letter D. Just ruminate on D for a little while, and you will see that it is unique in this way. It really,
Well, that was
a lot of dark stuff.
That was delightful. You used to edit, or maybe you still do. I know you've had some background in editing poetry. Um,
I not really. Yes, more proofreading. Proofreading. Yes. So my
okay,
husband
good.
runs a poetry publishing company, and I used to
Oh, okay.
I used to proofread all of the manuscripts.
Okay. Are you a poet?
No, I mean
Oh,
not no. I know enough. No, no. I used to write
okay.
poetry. I love poetry, and I love to read poetry,
Yeah.
but I don't really write it.
Yeah, but
No,
we can't go to the Emily Brewster poetry
no.
page and find it. Okay.
No.
And also, and we're running a little bit low on time, so if there are more questions, we should get to those. I wanted to ask you about the pub, which I had, it was my goal to like go as a pilgrimage and see this place because I'm sure it's not. I'm sure you don't have dictionaries all over the place in the pub, but you're co-owner of a pub.
Not all over
Uh,
the place, but yes, we have
you do
dictionary.
you do have dictionaries at the
Of
pub.
course.
Excellent. Good. So, what's your involvement there? Did you tell me you did you do the alcohol? Is that the drinks or
Well,
the important part?
years ago, my involvement has decreased over the years.
Wow.
And it started out with 4 partners. My husband and I are two of the owners. And oh gosh, it's kind of a long story. But the quick version of it is that when my husband and I, how do I really tell the quick version? We were living next door to this place, and it was a sleepy little drinkers pub, no food or anything. It was just a bar, and it changed ownership shortly after we had moved in, and it became this really loud, rowdy biker bar with motorcycles taking off at like 1:15 in the morning, and really loud music 4 nights a week. And anyway, my husband has a background in the restaurant business. We gathered partners and took on an incredible amount of debt, and we bought the building, and we put a kitchen in the basement, and we changed it into a pub.
Wow. So
So
it only because of the noise, you shut it down and opened up.
well, no, it came
Oh,
up for sale. It was
yeah. Okay.
it was a messy situation, and it was the management was suffering under some significant difficulties. So
Hmm.
it was up for sale, and
Yeah.
we bought
And
it.
you still live next door?
No, I mean, this is the thing. At one point we
Okay.
said, we either have to move or we have to buy it. And we had just it's a kind of a long story, but we had gotten to this point where we lived next to this thing after having put in a couple of years of working really, really hard at rehabbing this brick apartment building. We were living in one of the apartments and renting out the other 3. And there's a laundromat on the first floor. My husband runs the laundromat. He is
Oh, wow.
also runs a publishing poetry company and also is a writer and an artist. But anyway, so we felt like we either have to move or we have to buy it. And then we moved anyway, because it's really hard living above one business and next door to another business.
Sure. Well, yeah, I can imagine.
So we moved a
Well, that's
mile and a half away.
That's interesting. Now, all right, I have one more thing I wanted to ask you about. You may have some things you wanted to talk about, and we maybe went off completely different tangents, but we're kind of at our time limit, but we started late, so I guess we can cheat a little bit, right? We can ask people to stay on a little bit. You defined you found a new sense of the word a, which is not something that you would expect as a lexicographer to say, wait a second, we don't define this sense of a. And so can you explain how that happened and what that process is?
Sure. This is back when I was a baby lexicographer. So we were working on the collegiate dictionary, which again was published. It was published in 2003, and I started working for the company in July of 2000. And of course, we did not start in A. We had started in, I think, L. And I just happened to, at this point, everything was on paper. This entire dictionary was edited on paper, and I happened to be the editor who signed out this batch of citations to examine for the first alphabetical section of the alphabet, which is A to abdicate or something. I'm sure it was much smaller than that. But I was laying out all these citations on my desk and making piles, because you first have to see if all the examples that we have in the citations are already covered by existing senses. And so I had all these little piles all over my desk, and I ended up with this little, with this particular pile that the meaning that was in these examples was a meaning that was familiar to me and common and clearly established, but it wasn't in the dictionary yet. So I was very, very excited. This was really, I had not imagined that lexicography would be this exciting, to uncover a new sense of us. So I drafted it for entry and it got in. And I'm still talking about it 20 years later. Oh, I lost you.
I muted myself for a second. Can you explain what the different, what it is? And I've heard it explained, and I could never explain it, but what is the difference in the sense of a?
So we already covered the article, the indefinite article before proper nouns. So you've got like, oh, this city is like a Boston, or it's like a Seattle. We had that already. And we already had a Ms. Jones is calling you, that kind of a thing. But what we didn't have was this sense of that is used before a proper noun to distinguish that proper noun from a former, usual, or hypothetical condition. So the example that I wrote was, a triumphant Ms. Jones greeted her supporters. So the word there tells you that the fact that she is triumphant there's a new state there. She is not, if she's just the triumphant Ms. Jones, then she is just a triumphant lady, right? That's just, she is always triumphant. But a triumphant Ms. Jones tells you that there's been a shift. So that was that.
Okay, I think that's, I mean, I feel like you should feel like you could retire today and have your life's work would be impressive. So,
well, the funny thing is that just a few weeks later, I came home to my husband and told him that I worked on ass all day, which was also true.
Yes, there are joys. Well, on that note, we should say thank you so much. It's been delightful, wonderful. Only the positive D words are coming to play today. It's been really a lot of fun, and we should remind everyone we're not going to do a show in 2 weeks because it's going to be right in the middle of the holidays. But we are going to. I'm excited about the word of the year show with. This has not been done where every different dictionaries, different organizations come up with a word of the year. We're bringing them all together on that word chat January 5th to hopefully we'll get some good arguments over how people, it's a dumb word. Why did you choose that? That sort of thing. But we'll see how that goes. And
yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Dictionary editors tend to be a pretty civil bunch.
Yeah, that's probably true. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I am going to now play the music once again and share my screen. And this time I have a little bit of confidence that it's going to work. Not a lot, but a little bit. So thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Mark.